Esports is no new phenomenon. At a tournament in Atlanta more than 20 years ago, Dennis Fong won a Ferrari playing the popular first-person shooter game, Quake. That effectively made him the world's first professional gamer. Fong, better known as Thresh, has since been inducted into the Esports Hall of Fame and has made a career investing in and creating platforms to help build a community around gaming. I spoke to him about the evolution of esports. So Dennis, give me a sense of the differences of what esports are like now compared to when you were just starting out in the game.
Well, esports obviously has grown a ton since when I was competing. You know, you're talking about #1 prize money being in the thousands of dollars when I was competing, or frankly, actually hundreds of dollars when I first started competing. You know, these days you're talking about millions and tens of millions of dollars in prize money. So that's obviously a big difference. You know, also kind of spectator audience size. You know, back when I first started, there were hundreds of spectators at some of the live events. You know, these days you have tens of thousands, you know, live, and millions, sometimes tens of millions. I've heard even north of 100 million. For some of the world championships of the big esports. So, you know, obviously we've seen a lot of growth back compared to when I first started.
And is this growth a surprise to you? Goldman Sachs estimating that esports in general is about to hit $1 billion valuation.
To be honest, it's not a surprise at all. It was something back in the 90s, you know, when I was interviewed, I would always say that I thought esports one day could be, you know, one of the largest professional sports in the world. And the reason is quite simple, right? You've got billions with a B gamers globally. And gaming has some unique advantages compared to professional sports in that I can play as a gamer. I can compete against someone in China right now with no major issues. There's no physical limitations. You know, I don't have to be at least 6'6" to be a professional esports player. Frankly, I can be any size and it doesn't really matter. And I can be any gender. You know, so, you know, I think just the lack of having these major barriers of entry, you know, I always thought that it was just a matter of time.
Why is the social aspect of this industry so key in your view?
The accessibility of the players, because pretty much all of esports and gaming happens online. And, you know, a lot of the gaming happens online where, you know, even when you're practicing live against other players. And people stream on things like Twitch or Facebook or YouTube. You know, part of the appeal to the audience is that you're actually, you know, they can ask you questions, they can talk to you, and, you know, sometimes you know, the player will respond. And so that level of accessibility is really unheard of. And, you know, when you think about the NBA, how often do you get to either A, play in a game with LeBron James, which is pretty much never, or get to ask him questions while he's like practicing, you know, shooting hoops. But in pro gaming and esports, that happens every day. And so it's a really unique medium and part of why it's so successful.
Some of the most successful esports leagues out there are built around titles like Overwatch, for example. That's one that we looked into, that aren't necessarily the best-selling games. Why is that?
Yeah, so I mean, esports is different than traditional sports because, you know, no one owns a game of basketball, no one owns a game of football, but in esports, someone owns Overwatch, a company owns League of Legends. And so just, you know, the economics and the way that these quote unquote, esports are approached are slightly different. Because someone owns these games, you know, it requires the company that owns the game itself to put a lot of resources behind making a successful esport. And, you know, I mean, it's certainly happening today, but in the past, that was one of the challenges is the company didn't see why they should invest $100 million into esports. And, you know, certainly they've proven now that making a game an esport can help. It's essentially a free marketing and can drive new players to your game.
So what do you say to the younger gamers who are looking to really invest their time and money in becoming pro? Do you have any cautionary tales that you can share, or do you encourage young people to just go for it?
I mean, look, I'm a big believer in following your passion. But, you know, there's the flip side, which is just because you're passionate about something doesn't mean you're any good at it or that you can be great at it. I mean, when you think about your odds in gaming and esports, you've got over 1 billion people that play video games and maybe less than 1,000 professional players. You know, it's probably less than 1,000. So those odds are pretty slim. Just like any professional sport, it's pretty obvious if you're a special player. And so if you're kind of just middle of the road, you know, and you decide to try to make a go of it, you know, you just have to understand that the odds are not in your favor.
All right. Well, thanks for your time, Dennis. I appreciate your insight today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.